Hello, everyone. Hey, Miss Arnetta. Thank you so much for yesterday. So I'm glad to see that comments are working tonight. So tonight we're going to be working on part two of the Mkoba bag. And Mkoba, I mentioned on day one, means briefcase. So it's a briefcase style of bag. And so we work on it in sections. Part one is about the interfacing and discussing a little bit about the cutting and how to put the pattern pieces together. Tonight, we're going to work on the exterior of the bag and the construction of the exterior pieces. And then for day three, we're going to discuss the lining and putting everything together. So by the end of day three, you will be able to put your entire bag together. And so that's how we're going to work through this. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine Maldonado, and I am the owner and curator of Sew Your Bag. I'm primarily a subscription box service for beginner and aspiring bag makers who want to learn how to create handbags. And I curate a box, and so it's everything in the box that you need to create a bag. Also on my website, you will find things like hardware and interfacing, along with past patterns that I have created. Each box has a unique pattern specific to that box, which has been designed by me. So I make sure that it's domestic sewing machine friendly, along with making sure that it fits with what I'm trying to teach. So let's just quickly review what the Mkoba looks like once again, for those of you who didn't see it, and then we'll discuss which pieces you're going to need. So I will mention to you that there will be camera switching. So I'll try to warn you ahead of time by saying, okay, we're going to go to the cutting board or we're going to go to the sewing machine. But just so you know, there will be switching. So this is the Mkoba. Um, in the kit, everything that I'm using to construct this bag was in the monthly kit. And so you should be able to follow along if you have the kit. If you don't have the kit, just so that you know, tomorrow, which is March 1st, I will be putting up a couple of extra kits that I do have available for sale. So the exterior of the bag, last part one, we constructed this handle. The handle gets put on at the very end, but if you go back to part one, you will be able to find how to construct that handle. The flap, the sides, the bottom, and we will be inserting this twist lock, will all be covered today, along with this accordion style pocket that's on here. So this accordion style pocket, you can see it actually is expandable. And then we will also construct our zipper closure, as well as talk about how to create this tab. So I create the tab. If you've done this, I may create it a little bit different than you've seen it. And that's because I try to balance how much fabric is on one side. So I create more of a pocket. So this is what we will be doing today. The zipper portion of it, we will construct today in preparation for doing the lining, which is on day three. The bag does use a push lock or push together twist lock, which means that there are no screws that are needed for this. So both sides are smooth, and we're just going to push them together. So you will need a rubber mallet to be able to do that. If you're interested in these are from Serial Bag Maker, and I do have, some of her finishes in my shop so that you don't have to pay for shipping from Belgium. I do have a couple of finishes in my shop. The bottom will be waterproof canvas, and that's so that when you put your bag down here doesn't get soiled as easy. And if you want to, you can absolutely add purse feet. However, the instructions for adding purse feet are not in the pattern. This is meant to be very simple, and I tried to keep it as simple as possible. So let's take a look at the pattern pieces that you will need. So you will need the flap. And not only will you need the flap exterior, which is this piece, you will also need the lining piece because we're going to put the entire flap together. You will need the corresponding piece of foam for your flap. So you should have cut your flap Your flap is shorter than your main body piece, and that is to keep the bulk out of your sewing. You will need a piece of waterproof canvas for the bottom. So I'm using a black piece of waterproof canvas. You will need your front and back exterior pieces, so front and back, and you will also need, excuse me, a piece of foam, and the foam should be one piece, so it's going to be one large piece of foam. Oh, let me just turn that binging off, that beep, I mean, so hopefully that'll go off. So please let me know that you can still hear me. I turned off part of the sound so I don't hear the chimes coming through. Okay, you will also need your side pieces, and this is after you taped your pieces together, and that was covered in day one. I'm only going to be using the exterior pieces, so I have both the lining and the exterior, but tonight I'm only going to be using the exterior pieces. You will also need your foam. You will need your zipper. I'm using zipper by the yard. The length of zipper that you need is given in there. Thank you, Arnetta. Is in there. And you will also need the little tab piece to make the little zipper pocket, because these two are raw ends. You will need both pieces, the exterior and the lining, for that front expandable, or what I'm referring to as an accordion style pocket. You will need the top exterior and lining for your zipper closure. So the zipper closure, we're going to cut this in half when we get to this part of it, but everything that I have here should have already been interfaced and ready to go, so just ready to sew. The last thing that you're going to need, and I put it to the side, it's someplace safe, I promise, is the twist lock for your bag. All right, so it can be the push together kind like I have, or whatever type of twist lock you'd like. All right, for those of you who are following along with me in the pattern, I am currently on page, okay, I'm on page 13, which is constructing the exterior. So we will be doing some ironing tonight, and we will have to draw some lines. Hi. Hi, Tia. I'm glad you made it tonight. So excited. I felt your pain last night. There are just days like that when you're just so wiped. So the first thing we're going to do is draw some lines on our exterior pieces and our side pieces. One thing that I try to do on all of the pattern pieces, because they are smaller, is I try to make sure to keep the foam out of your stitch line at the top, or if it's on the sides, not as much, but definitely at the top, to help reduce some of that bulk. So yesterday we spoke about measuring a little bit, and just look at your pieces. If you have pieces that are right side up or directional, you want to make sure that your print is facing up. As needed, you can turn over your pieces, and you can come back in, and you can draw an arrow like that. You can write the word top, whatever you need to do, so that you know that that is the top of your material. The last thing you want to do is sew it all together and it's upside down. So we're going to have these two pieces. I'm going to draw a line 1 inch from the top. Now, the reason I draw that line is because I'm then going to fold it over, and I will be ironing that fold over. So I explained yesterday is I double whatever the width is of the fold over. So I want you to have a 1/2 inch fold on the top. So because I want you to have a 1/2 inch, I double that and I make it 1 inch. So 1/2 times 2 is 1 inch. So I will draw a 1 inch line. Please use a marking tool that's erasable. I'm going to use one that's not erasable, but you should be using one that is erasable or removable. And I'm using this one because I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. Okay, so I draw, see that red line? I draw a line. That's 1 inch. So I'm going to do it on the top of my exterior pieces. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the sides. And then what we'll do is we'll go to the ironing board and we're going to fold the raw edge to that line, which is what will give us our 1/2 inch fold over. So I hope everybody caught that. If you still have questions, just let me know and I will repeat it. So I am going to only use the exterior pieces. So once again, on the side pieces, I'm going to draw a line 1 inch from the straight edge, not the curved edge, which is at the bottom. Oh, I already did this one. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our ironing board and we're going to iron our straight edges. So those straight edges, what we will do is we will fold that straight raw edge down until it meets that drawn line. And when you do that, this folded piece should be a 1/2 inch. So we're going to do that for the side pieces and we will do it also for our front and our back. Okay. So I'm just going to fold this raw edge down and press. Now, what I will say to you is if you're using a Frisian pen or a friction pen, however it's pronounced, make sure that you fold it because the line will go away. So make sure you keep it a little bit away and then fold it afterwards. I do use steam and I am using my interface for this bag, as I mentioned on day one. This is a stiffer interface, so I'm using the DLH 2010 Heavy, and you can find that in the show notes. So it is a woven interface. It's just heavier than a standard interface. So it's heavier than if you're using, let's say, Joann's woven SF101. So now this is the front and the back. Once again, make sure that you're doing this and you'll double check when you're done that if it's directional fabric, that you are doing it along the top straight edge. So it should be the longest side, but along the top straight edge. If you have any questions, just type them into the chat. Doesn't have to be about this bag. If you have a general bag making question, you can ask that question as well. Now I will be pulling this. I have to think about how did I do this. Okay, so this bag will be a drop-in lining bag. Yes, it is my pattern, I promise you. Okay, so I've ironed all those edges down. If you don't iron it, you can absolutely come back later on. It just makes it easier when you're putting in the foam to come back to fold it over the foam. So I'm going to take one of my exterior front or back, whichever one my exterior piece is, and I'm going to lay it on my cutting surface right side up. So I'm going to, wrong side up. I'm going to attach the bottom waterproof canvas piece. So that was the black strip, this black strip. I'm not adding foam. So I know somebody's going to come back and say, oh, where's the foam and all that? The foam is going to be one piece. I'm not adding it in piecing. So that's a great question, Arnetta. So it's not like Decoville Light. So what it is, it's sort of, I don't know if you know Decor Bond, which is kind of stiffish. It's kind of a little bit stiff. So somebody said it's a cross between Decor Bond and Decoville Light. So it's a cross between those two. It's not as, it gives stability, but it's thick, like Deco Bond, a little bit thicker than Deco Bond, but not as heavy as Decoville Light. But you can absolutely use Decoville Light if that's something you'd like to use. Okay. Yes. So all of the entire bag. So yes, Tia, the entire bag is interfaced with the Decoville Heavy, and that's because I wanted it to have body, and I did not want it to be floppy. So I used the entire bag, uses about, I think it was a yard of the heavy, DLH 2010 Heavy, and that's to give it stability. If I used the lighter woven interface, which is my light, it would have been floppy, and I didn't want that. Okay. So the waterproof canvas piece, I'm not interfacing, so it shouldn't be interfaced at all. What we will do is we'll come back later and we will add a piece of Decoville Heavy to the bottom of our lining. So that's how I get interface and stability at the bottom. So if I turn this piece and make sure that it's directional, so this should be the bottom, that's your top. I'm going to turn my exterior piece right side up, and I'm going to take my waterproof canvas, and it should be the side, and I should have picked a different color, but one side has a fabric texture and the other one has kind of like a waxy or plastic texture. We're going to lay it right sides together. So the right side of your fabric with the right side of the waterproof canvas. Now, if you decide that you want to use regular fabric for this or vinyl, once again, most vinyl, I interface my vinyl, just be very careful if it has a print, but you can definitely use vinyl for the bottom as well. And then if you do that, you don't necessarily, I would still use the Decoville Heavy on the bottom of the lining. So you'll see that when I get to it. So I'm just going to clip this in place. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew along the bottom using a stitch length of approximately, or actually exactly 3.5, between 3 and 3.5, and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. Make sure to back tack at the beginning and the end. On my sewing machine, you'll hear me mention, I use the outer edge as my 1/4 of an inch. On your sewing machine, measure 1/4 of an inch. Honestly, your seam allowance should just be consistent throughout. Okay. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to remove my clips and I'm going to finger press this down. So when we come back, I will be stitching along this line when I add it to my foam, and it's a way to lock it to the foam. So I'm just going to finger press that real well. If you have a roller, you can do that as well. So now that this is done on one side, we're going to grab our other piece. So if you're keeping front or back, I don't know. You may have a preference to which is front or back. Once again, right sides together. So the right side of this with the right side of our waterproof canvas. And I'm going to clip it in place. And I'm going to come back and do the same thing. I'm going to stitch using 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to come back and stitch along this straight edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So my sewing machine that I'm using is a Juki 2010Q. So it is a domestic sewing machine, or considered a domestic sewing machine. So any type of sewing machine that is domestic, it should work. If you're using, of course, if you're using vinyl and you're comfortable with that, you would use whatever sewing machine you have. I do have an industrial sewing machine, but I don't use it for my patterns. I will use this sewing machine, the 2010Q, believe it or not, for my linings. And then I will use the industrial for, if I'm using like vinyl, I'll use my industrial for that. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to finger press this as well. So I want to make sure that I finger press it. Now, the question is, how do you finger press it and in which direction? I press it in the direction that it naturally falls. So it looks like it's naturally falling outward here. You can push it this way, but then you're going against it. So just whatever direction it actually falls in or naturally falls in, you can do that. You can iron on waterproof canvas. So you can definitely iron this if you want flatter. Make sure that you're ironing as much as you can on the fabric, but as long as it's the right side of the waterproof canvas. You don't want to iron on this waxy side. It will stick to your iron. So you're going to do this. When you finger press it, because this seam is falling to the right or in the direction of your exterior, you will find that there's a roll over here where it's attached that goes this way. If you fold it the other way, so if you fold it so that your seam is going the other way, the black or waterproof canvas the roll will go that way. So you'll see the curve go that way. I like it, like I said, let it fall where it naturally falls. I like it when it rolls this way, because what happens then is you will then, when you place your bag down, you won't see any of the black on and it's an odd thing, but when you rest it down, you won't see the bottom. But if you do it the other way, you can see an 1/8 of an inch or so. So I'm just going to very quickly just make sure I finger press this really, really well. Just like that. Okay. Like I said, you can iron it. The waterproof canvas will soften up, so don't rest your iron on there. But as soon as it cools off, it'll come back. So the next step now is going to be to add the foam. So the foam I'm going to attach here. So I'm going to do an 1/8 of an inch and an 1/8 of an inch, and we'll talk about that. But I need to flip this over to the reverse side, just like that. And I always cut my foam just a little bit bigger. It just gives me wiggle room. But what we're going to do is take our foam and we're going to put it right underneath where the fold is here. So it should be right up to that fold. Just like that. And then the other side should also come, I cut mine too short, should come right underneath that fold. I'm going to clip it on the side. And because I'm actually going to sew it from the front side, my clips, so here goes the clips. There's a flat side and then there's a round side, right? So the flat side should be against your sewing machine bed and the round side should be sticking up. And that's so when you're sewing, it's totally smooth. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure I push this down really, really well. I am going to clip the sides here. Come back on this side. We're just clipping right underneath that fold. So you're not going to clip up. You're not going to take your foam all the way to the edge. You're going to clip it under where that fold is. Because when we're done, this edge that we have that's up should be able to fold right over that fold. And that's where that foam. And that's why I talk about reducing the bulk. If you had it all the way to the edge, what would happen is when you folded it over, you would have 2 layers of foam and then you'd have 2 layers of fabric, right? But I can reduce the bulk by cutting it shorter. And that way, when I roll it over like this, I only have 1 layer of foam. That also helps to make it domestic sewing machine friendly. Foam is, I actually use Anti-Soft and Stable. I like the sew-in because I don't like, if you don't adhere the other one properly, and the one that's the fusible kind, if you don't adhere it properly, you will get bubbles under your fabric and it shows on your bag. So I like to use the sewing kind, and then that way I know that I'm not going to get any bubbles. I have found that when I use the other type, which is non-sew-in or fusible, if you go back and try to refuse where you see those air pockets, it doesn't always stick. So, all right, so now once I've done that, I'm going to flip this over, straighten out my clip, straighten out my piece. Now, when I stitch this, I'm going to stitch using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I just want to lock it down on the sides, on both sides. Once I've done that and I've locked it down, I'm then going to come back and I'm going to sew on the fabric 1/8 of an inch from this fold line. And that helps to lock the foam in place. Okay. So once again, I'm going to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch to adhere the foam to the fabric to the foam. So I'm just going to go down one side and then down the other side. And then I will come back and on the exterior fabric, not on the waterproof canvas, on the exterior fabric, I'm going to do 1/8 of an inch from that edge. Now, if you find that you have issues with the 1/8 of an inch, especially along this edge, you can use 1/4 of an inch. That's totally fine. Um, and that you may see for yourself, you get better results and it's easier, especially if you're a new sewer. So it doesn't matter. I'm going to use 1/8. If you find it's hard and it's rolling back and forth, use 1/4. It doesn't matter. It's just meant to lock the foam to the fabric. So let's go back to the sewing machine. Okay. Now, when you're sewing this, make sure that this is unfolded. So don't sew it with it folded down. You want it unfolded. Once again, 1/8 of an inch. This is something that for those of you who are new, do the best you can with sewing the edge. I tell you not to use 1/4 of an inch because then you'll have to rip out the threads. So if you go a little bit off and come back on, that's totally fine because you're not going to see it anyway. Basting stitch for me is a 6, so that's the longest on my sewing machine. For you, a basting stitch is whatever stitch length you don't mind ripping out. So if you want to use a 9, you can. If you want to use a 6, mine only goes up to a 6. So the longest stitch on your sewing machine or the longest stitch that you don't mind ripping out. I will back tack here. I did not mention on my sewing machine as well, 1/8 of an inch for me is right on the inside here of my presser foot. So that's on my machine. Once again, when you get to this end, please unfold that end. You don't want it folded under. So that's one side basted, and I'm going to go back and baste the other long edge. So now that that's basted down, we're going to come back. I'm going to top stitch. So a top stitch is going to be a longer than a standard stitch, but it's meant to be more decorative. So you're going to turn your stitch length down to either a 4 or a 4.5. You'll have to play with this, but usually between a 4 and a 4.5 will give you the longest stitch you need for that top stitching. So now what I'm going to do is, like I mentioned before, is at 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to sew on the exterior fabric, not the waterproof canvas, the exterior fabric. And that's just to lock the foam in place. All right, I did one side and I'm going to do the other side. I am back tacking, by the way. Okay, so let's go back to our cutting mat and let's look at what we've done. Okay, so once you've sewn that in, the foam should be locked in here. So along the edge, you can see that I even went off, but it doesn't matter. It's, it's close enough. And then these are the lines, the other lines that I used. You should not have any foam on this side or this side on your fold over. Your foam will get, this will get folded over just like that, and it will cover the foam. So I know Arnetta asked a question. So Annetta, your question is there a reason not to base the foam at the top? Yes. So if I base the foam at the top over here, so if I do this and then I base it to the top, when you fold it over, you're going to see stitches. So you really don't need to base it at the top. If you base it on the sides, that should be sufficient just to hold it in. I'm also not folding this over and basting it because when I attach all the pieces, these pieces, I want it to look like it's seamless. So it's a one complete seam. So that's why I do not baste at the top. I based only along the sides to hold this in place. Okay. So now once you've done that and all your basting is done, that was a really good question, Annetta. Okay. So once you've done that and you've basted everything together, you've completed pretty much the exterior of the bag. All right. The last step I'm going to do is, because I'm going to need to attach my side pieces, is I'm going to mark the center, and you can mark it any way that you're comfortable with. If you want to use a marking tool, you can do that. I mark the centers by aligning like this, folding it in half, aligning it, make sure that the top lines up. And then I take a little snip over here, right where the stitches are. So the stitches are right here. And right inside the stitch line, I just take a little angular, like 45-degree angle snip. And then, I don't know, you can see it looks like a little V. You can use a marking tool if you would like to use a marking tool to do that. I make sure to align my bottom border on one side with the bottom border on the other. It's pretty easy because you can see the stitch lines just like that. I then just pull this out, make sure to align the top as well. And then I do another snip. So just stay within that 1/8 of an inch basting line and you should be good. And the reason I do that is because I'm going to have to add the side pieces, and I want to make sure that it's totally, it is in the center. And I don't have to guess where the center of this is. All right, so if you're still following along with me, I'm on page 16, and I'm going to do the accordion pocket. So that's going to be this pocket here. So I'm going to construct this pocket here and then attach it to the bag. So you're going to grab your pieces, and there should be an exterior and a lining piece. You can absolutely do 2 exteriors, 2 lining. It's your bag. You can make it any way that you would like. So I'm going to need that, and I am going to need the push together which I don't know where it is, so let me just get another one. The twist locks. And that's what happens when you put something in a secure location. I had everything together and I said, okay, now I'm all set. So let's see if I stuck it in my drawer here. I'm going to need these as well. So since I'm in here, and I will need some of this, which is paper tape. And I will need to figure out please hold. I really don't know what I did with it. Okay. I will. Okay, so you will need one of these. So these come with, which are the push together. These come with, it's really 3 pieces. So you have the twist lock piece, which is this piece here. So it's 4 pieces. It's a twist, it's a plate, right? These 2 push together. One is smaller than the other. So I can show you that. They will push together. So there's no screws. You will actually have the twist lock itself. And then you will have a plate which goes on the back. Because I want extra stability, I also add a piece of Decoville Heavy to it as well. Now you can iron this on or not iron it on. It's totally up to you. It doesn't matter because once you use it, it's going to stay in place. Right? So I'm going to use a piece of Decoville Heavy for that. And I'm going to grab my rubber mallet. You can use a hammer. I do recommend having a rubber mallet, however, in your arsenal of tools. Rubber mallets help not to mark up your hardware. So that's why I use a rubber mallet. Okay. So I'm going to align the plate. So I give you dimensions for the plate in the instructions, and I tell you how far down to measure from the top long edge. If you're using a different twist lock that I'm using, I will say to you, I'll give you a little bit of guidance. So what you're going to do is you want your plate to be on here in such a way that when you put your flap on, you have to make sure you align this opening with that. So I put it low enough down, and it's not centered, it's a little bit off center, and I'll show you that. But I put it low enough down that my flap will just barely cut it, but it's not, you see, it's not halfway down because this is the pocket right here. This entire width is a pocket, and it's somewhere about maybe a third of the way down. And when I close the flap, then that aligns. You do want to make sure that it's centered left and right, but you want to bring it down off of the top, but not all the way down the bottom. If I put it all the way down the bottom, when I put my flap in, it would cover the pocket. And I didn't want to do that. I want to be able to see that there is a pocket under there. So that's just a little bit of guidance. Make sure it's centered left and right. Play with it. Play with yours. In the directions, I give you the directions for this push together twist lock. So I hope that that makes sense. Okay. So I do this in 2 steps because I need to see where things are in order to know where to place this. So you can guesstimate as to where to place it, but I want it to be placed in such a way that I can lay it just like that. So I will measure down where this is from the top. So I'm going to get my little ruler and I will do that. And then after I've done that, I will measure down again. All right, so I'm going to measure down this way. And first thing you're going to do is I'm going to just draw a center line on this real quick. You can fold this in half like I did before. So if you fold it in half one way, put a little snip, fold it in half the other way, put a little snip, or you could just measure what half is, right? And then once you've done that, you can then lay this, let's clear off some of this, so that the center lines, top and bottom, this center mark and that center mark are in the center. I'm then going to measure down from the top edge and place a mark right there. Okay. Now, once I place my mark and I realize that is my center mark, I'm then going to take my plate, right? Because that's really where I want the top of it to be. Put the top edge of my plate on that line, and I'm going to draw in these two slits. Now, what I suggest that you do is take your ruler and just double check that the distance from the left is the same distance as it is from the right. So then you know that that's centered, right? Because you want to make sure the edge of the plate. You don't want to put it in and then it's, it's to one side or the other. So I'm just measuring that and I'm measuring this. Okay. So once you've done that, you know that your Decoville has to go here, right? It has to go in that spot. So I'm going to fuse that right there on that spot, and then I'll come back and measure again. The purpose of the Decoville, even though you come with the washer, and this is a habit that I got into, they give you these washers, but I don't know if you've ever felt them. The edges are very sharp. So as you're using your twist lock, those sharp edges are actually digging into your fabric. So over time, it will wear through it. The Decoville Heavy, or you can use, believe it or not, you can use a piece of vinyl. If you have a scrap piece of vinyl or leather, you can use that. It will take a while to dig through this extra piece of fabric. So I fuse this on first, then I put this on top. Also, you'll notice in some of these pieces on the back side also, the little notches are also very rough, and I can feel that on these, and the top is smooth, and that's because I use a punch to punch the holes out. So let me just fuse this down real quick. I do use steam for Decoville Heavy. Once again, you can use a piece of vinyl if you would like. If you're using vinyl, what I would recommend you do is just use some, beacon glue or something to hold it down while you work. You can even use just like a child's glue stick. You just want something, or double-sided tape, just something to hold the vinyl down while you work. So that's so funny, Arnetta, because I mentioned that yesterday, and you're not the only one who said that. Who said that the fabric was too pretty to use on the inside of a lining. And I felt that somebody would say that, and quite a few of you said that. So that's so funny that you said that. So basically, you got 2 bags for one. Okay, so now I'm going to measure this down again. So I'm going to center it this way, measure down because I know it's where I want it to be. You know, if they say measure once, measure twice, cut once. So now it's there. I'm going to take my plate. I'm going to put it on that line. You can see I got it almost right in the middle. And then I'm just going to measure left and right just to make sure that it's at the same point. Now, I didn't necessarily give measurements for where it is because I don't know. Every plate that I could have gotten from the manufacturer could have been different. And I didn't want to say, oh, it should be this way. And then, so I just say measure left and right and make sure that it's roughly the same distance and it is centered, and then let's draw your lines. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to cut those lines so that we can insert our twist lock. So you can use a seam ripper. All right, so I'm going to grab a seam ripper here. You can use a small pair of scissors. And if you use a small pair of scissors, all you would simply do is fold this in half. Just fold it just like this. And then you would snip that little line. So I'll do it both ways for you. So I'm just using a little pair of, I think these are embroidery scissors. But I folded it in half. See that? It doesn't have to be exact. And then you're just going to put a little snip. It's better to cut it too small and have to come back later on and make the hole bigger than to cut it too big. Okay? So then I cut that hole right in there. So when I insert my prong, and I only did one side so far. When I insert my prong where that hole is, it'll come through to the back. So hopefully you can see that. All right, so now I need to cut the other one. When I use my seam ripper, the way that I do it is I insert it at the top or the bottom. I insert it here, straight down, and then I bring it up. I fold the fabric and I bring it up on the other side. So it looks like that. I don't cut like some people will cut straight across on that line. I don't do that because I have overshot it and cut the hole too big. So I put it in one side, I bend it a little bit, and then come up the other side. So then when I push my seam ripper, I'm only cutting the line, right? So all I cut was on that line, and I won't overshoot it. There's a couple of techniques you can use, but that's the one that I use. So now you're going to take your twist lock, the one with the prongs. You're going to stick the prongs through that hole, just like that, to make sure that your holes are open, your holes are in there. Okay, so make sure you cut straight through. All right, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take your plate, which is this guy, you're going to put it over there, over those prongs. Now, I do fold my prongs in. This is a controversy. I fold my prongs in towards the middle. And that's because when I fold them out, and this is just from my experience, if you repeatedly pull on this, when they're bent out like that, it's easy to dislodge it and pull it out this way. When they're in the middle like this, you have to pull or rip a hole in your fabric to get it out. So my experience has been, if they were like this, as you're moving, and especially like magnetic closures, because you're pulling and pulling and pulling, I've had the prongs actually bend in this way and come dislodged. So that's why I bend mine in. I don't know why other people do it, but that's why I bend it. And I found that I've had the most success by bending it in. So I'm just going to bend those down towards the middle. Just like that. Try to bend it in such a way that you're actually bending from the bottom. Don't try bending the prong from the top. So don't bend from here. I actually put my thumb down there and pushed my prong down. Once you've done that, you're going to put a piece of tape on. I use this Gorilla tape, and that's just to help it stay a little bit more secure. So I get this from Home Depot, so it's nothing fancy. You should be able to find it at Lowe's or Home Depot. All right. And I'm just going to stick that right over my closure and press it down. That's it. So now you've installed the first part of your closure. we have another part. Once again, if you're following along with me, I am on page 18. So the next thing we're going to do is we want to get our other piece, which is this piece. Okay. And I'm going to put a bottom, I'm going to iron this up, and that's so that when I have to sew it in, it's nice and clean and I don't have to fiddle with getting this folded. So the same way I did it for, the same way I did it for your top and your bottom, I just want to create a clean edge. So I'm going to draw a line a 1/2 inch because I want a 1/4 inch fold over from the bottom. Remember, the bottom of this piece should be the longer part, not the shorter part. Okay. And make sure that if you're using directional fabric, that is right side up. So let's do this. I'm going to draw a line 1/2 inch. Remember I said double what you want the fold. I want my fold to be a 1/4 inch because my seam allowance is a 1/4 inch. So I'm going to make this a 1/2 inch line. I'm going to go back to the ironing board and I'm going to fold that to meet the bottom. So I did use a erasable, a heat erase pen. So I have to make sure I iron this really quickly before everything heats up. So you'll see what happens when I do this, why I do this. Okay, so that's one. And then we'll do this one. Once again, if it's directional fabric, please make sure that your top is at the top. So with the heat erasable pen, the friction pen, my ironing board is so hot that when I put the fabric down, the line started to disappear. Okay. So next what we're going to do, and you can definitely leave the lock off, I will say to you, and put it on afterwards through the opening. I'm just making it easier for anybody, once again, who's a beginner and may have difficulty doing it. It's easier to do it this way. So we're going to take our two pieces. The fold should be at the bottom, and we're going to place them right side together, and we're going to clip them in place. Now, be careful when you're doing this because as you sew, there is that bulk of the lock and your fabric could shift a little bit. So just make sure you clip it enough to prevent that shifting. Okay. Once we've done this, that fold at the bottom, you can unfold it. We're going to come back to it later. Unfold it. You want it totally flat, so match your corners. We're going to sew along that folded edge. But what we're going to do is we're going to leave an opening at our bottom. And when I put it together, we're going to match that folded edge, and it's easier to fold under, especially because this is a thick piece of interfacing, right? So pre-folding it will definitely help. Okay. So now that we've done that and everything is together and all our edges are matched, we're going to go into the sewing machine and we're going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a stitch length of 3 or 3.5, whichever you're comfortable with. I use 3.5, by the way. And then what we will do is when it comes to the corners, we're going to leave an opening at the bottom here to be able to turn it through. So I would say come in maybe about a 1/2 inch on either side, or an inch actually on either side. If you want to, you can measure it and then just draw a line. So whatever amount you think will give you enough room to turn this right side out. So if you think you can do it with less of an opening, please feel free to do that. I'm just leaving a big enough opening to be able to do it. So I'm going to go to my sewing machine now, and I am going to sew that. I'm going to start at one end here where the line is, go up. When I get to the corner, I'm going to pivot, go up, cross the top, pivot, come down, and then stop at that last line. make sure you back tack at the beginning and the end. So I just want to make sure I have enough light on my sewing machine, which I do. Great. Okay. So once again, I'm starting at the bottom where I have that fold. Make sure it's unfolded, right? I want to make sure it's unfolded. I am using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I should be sewing pretty much on that fold, right? Because that was a 1/4 inch. Go forward, back, tack, back. Sorry. When you get to about a 1/4 inch from the edge here, what you're going to do is leave your needle down. Rotate your hand wheel so that the needle starts to come up. Don't let it come all the way up. You'll then lift your presser foot and you will pivot. Now, the reason that you do that, I'm going to take one more stitch here. The reason that you do that is to make sure that your top thread has caught your bobbin thread. If you've ever had a time when you're doing something and you had to turn a corner, especially on the exterior of the bag, and then you notice there's a little like diagonal line, that's because your top thread didn't catch your bobbin thread. If you get in the habit of doing that, turning that wheel till it starts going up, you'll see less of that happening. Okay, so now we're going to go to the other end. When you get to about a 1/4 inch, once again, turn your hand wheel so the needle goes up. Then lift your presser foot and pivot. And my clips are upside down. Once again, rotate that hand wheel. Needle should still be down and pivot. Make sure the bottom is totally unfolded. I'm going to go back across and I'm going to back tack at that corner. Once again, if you don't feel that you need this bigger opening, make it smaller. So now we're going to clip those edges, those ends or those corners to make it totally smooth. Okay, so now we have this piece done. We're going to need to stick our hand in there and grab that. But before we do that, we want to cut our corners at about a 45-degree angle. And it should be approximately 1/8 inch away from your stitch line. You can make it a little bit further away, but do not cut those stitches at all. So I cut it at an angle 45 degrees, close to the stitch line without cutting it. And this is like grading it. And then once I've done that, I then cut up at an angle this way. And then I cut it at an angle this way. So I'll show you what it looks like. So hopefully you can see that. Can you see how I cut this way, and then there's like a little point? Look at this corner, and then look at that corner where I did nothing to it. You see the difference? So I cut 45 degrees close to the stitch line, and then I cut at an angle, and then at an angle here. And that's to help reduce the bulk, but not only that, it also helps to create a clean corner. I tell you, don't get too close to the stitches because you don't want to, when you're turning it right side out and poking it, you don't want to poke a hole in it. Okay, so once we've done that, the next thing we're going to do is turn this right side out. So you're going to stick your hand in there. I normally poke this down, so I grab it in sort of like I'm grabbing pantyhose, and I put my finger here, and then I turn it right side out, and I push. You can use a crochet hook for this. You can use a knitting needle, whatever you want to use, but you can just turn it right side out. And it is going to be stiff, but you should be able to do it. Okay, and then straighten it out. Poke those corners out and try to get them as sharp as you can get them. But if you graded it, then it should be pretty, you should get a pretty good corner. I'm going to grab, this is just a hair clip for your hair. And I'm gently poking it. I'm not like, going in there like a crazy woman. I'm just poking it to get it out. The other thing I do is I run it along the seam. Once I get it out, I run it along the seam just to help get it even flatter. Just really want to get it out there. Hopefully you can see my corners. Okay. And then we're going to give it a good iron. We're going to iron this really well, just so it's nice and flat. Because the next thing we're going to need to do is fold this. We're going to need to make some marks so that we can fold it so it has that dimensional look to it. Okay. All right. Now, if you did this correctly, it should be pretty easy to fold it under and match those folds. There should be like really no fiddling with it. It should just fold right in on itself at 1/4 inch. And this is going to get closed up anyway when we attach it. So but that's how it should look. Let me just see. I have a little bit more in this corner to work on. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to iron this because I want it nice and flat. It's just going to make it easier when we have to fold it. You're not going to iron over that closure, right? That twist lock, you're just ironing this part. All right, so now that that's done, the next thing we're going to do is we want to put it on our exterior piece. But before we do that, we need to make a couple of drawn lines on here. So I'm going to just let this cool off a little bit. And once again, this definitely has to be in a removable marker because we do not want it to, we don't want the lines to be permanent. One thing I'll mention as well is when you're using these pens, the friction pens or the Frisian pens, I've heard them used different ways. Depending on the material, I would tell you to test it. This happens to be a blue one. There's red ones. There's all kinds of colors. But test it because sometimes when you draw the line and then you apply heat, you will see a white line. So test it on your material. If it does that, you probably want to use something like a chalk liner instead of using one of these pens. The other thing I've heard is that if you then cool it off, so right now when it's hot, it goes away, but if it gets cold, the line comes back. So that's just a couple of things to be aware of when you're using this. So what I'm going to do is along the top, I will not be sewing it. So I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew along the top on the right side using a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and a stitch length between a 4 and a 4.5. So I'm making a longer stitch length. And the top stitch length is what I'm referring to when I use the 4 and 4.5. So I will back tack. So 1/8 of an inch. If you're not comfortable making an 1/8 of an inch, use a 1/4 inch. It's okay. You can use a 1/4 inch. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to draw some lines here because I want to make sure that this pocket, the way that I'm doing it, is when you're done, this pocket will fold just like this, just like that. And the same on this side. And that's how you get the dimension, the 3-dimension in here. So I'm going to tell you, you're going to draw some lines. I'm on page 19 where it gives you, how much to draw in. So let me get my ruler and do that. And I am drawing it the full length, and I'm drawing it from both short edges. Once again, I'm using an erasable pen. This one is heat erasable, but use a chalk liner or something. Now this one's interesting because it's blue, but you can't see it on the black. So that's where a chalk liner would actually even come in better. All right. So once I've done that, what happens then is when I fold on that line, just like that, I should be able to tuck this piece under like so. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach it to my bag, and you'll have in the directions it tells you where. It'll be flat. You will attach it, and then when we're done, you will fold this, and it should be on that fold to match the edge. And then we're going to sew along the bottom, which is how we get that bottom edge closed. So that's why I don't worry about the bottom edge. Okay, so we've done the top. We measured in from both sides. You're going to measure in from this side and this side. And then what you're going to do is you're going to what you're going to do is you're going to fold this in. Just double checking something. Okay, yeah. Where you place the fold, you're going to fold it in, and you're going to clip it. And we're going to sew again along that edge also at 1/8 of an inch. We want to have a nice peak, and I'll show you what I'm referring to. Hopefully you can see it. Right here, I sewed it on both ends, so it's nice and sharp. So it creates a pleat. So I'm going to do the same on this side as well. So I'll just fold it in, and then we'll go to the sewing machine and we'll sew it. So when you're done, it will look like that. All right, so they should be folded under 1/8 of an inch on both folds. Now take your time because there is some bulk, especially where this top is folded for the seam. And I will be back tacking at the top and the bottom. Same stitch length between a 4 and a 4.5. Now, I'm not worrying about that opening down there because that's going to get closed up. Remember, I said it's going to get closed up when I sew along the bottom. Okay. And this is what it's going to look like. So you can see how that has that little pleat in there. That's what it looks like. So once you've done that, and you have your little pleats in place, now you're going to get your exterior. Now, so you determine which is the front and the back. It's totally up to you on your piece, which one you want to be, the front or the back. So we're going to lay it on our cutting mat. I'm just going to make this the front. And I'm going to attach this here. That's what's going to happen. But once again, once I attach it on one side, I have to make sure that it's the same distance on the other side. So it gives you the dimensions within the pattern, how to place it on here. It should be centered. So it should be totally centered. And then when you're done, and I'm just eyeballing it, but you should definitely look at the pattern directions. And I said use, you can use paper tape. I'm going to just stick some pins in here. I normally don't use pins, but I will today. And you're going to put those pins or the paper tape, however you can get it to attach, just like that. And you want it to stay in there. Once again, make sure that it's centered. I actually can see my center line, so I can see my center line there. But you should measure it according to the pattern directions. And I'm just sticking these pins in there. And it should be folded, right? So remember I said you're going to fold that pleated edge until it matches that straight edge that's not sewn. When you're done and you've done it to both sides, you want to come back with your ruler and just measure it to make sure it's the same distance from this side on the right and that side on the left. So for those of you who are using paper tape, which is why I took it out, you grab your paper tape. It's pretty easy. And what's nice is paper tape is it'll perforate it, so then you can just rip it off. And it doesn't have any kind of adhesive glue that gets stuck or anything like that. So this is another good thing. Nancy, who's one of my subscribers, mentioned it, and ever since then I find so many uses for it. And you get this in the pharmacy, in the pharmacy. It's not anything that's fancy. So I'll do one side with pins and one side with paper tape. So I'm going to put this on, and then I'm going to just take the paper tape and tape it down like you would, a package or something like that. Like I said, it's not very sticky. So for those of you who need a little extra help, please use the pins. And then all you do is take this and put it down like that. And then you just press it down, right? So then that'll be like that. That'll be like that. And then once you have that in there, what you will do, again, come back and measure it and make sure that it's the same distance on both sides. And mine is. I just eyeballed it, but it's the same distance. And when you fold it down like this, when you're done, you'll see it. So I'm going to sew the side with the paper tape first, just because it's moving. 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, back tack at the top and the bottom. Okay. And then I'm going to come back to the side with the pins. So you'll see me do that. Now you may have to fold your bag within the throat of your machine. So just fold it up. It's like this. 1/8 of an inch. I will say to you that, if you're somebody who's going to be using, going in and out of here a lot, you can use a stitch length of 3. I use a 4 and a 4.5 just because it's thick. So I'm going to back tack at the top and the bottom. And you can actually see through the tape, by the way. Just like that. And then I'm going to come back over here to where I have my pins. Make sure to take the pins out as you go. You don't want to break a needle. So you can see my bottom is still open. So let's go back and take a look at this. So if you use the paper tape, it is perforated. So just pull on it, hold your fabric and just pull it, and it's perforated and it'll come off just like that. And I pull towards the stitches. I pull in the direction of the stitches. I don't pull in away from the stitches. But you can see you can do it either way. And then what happens is when you fold these down flat, just like that, it will be centered. And you want to double check that. Once again, if you have to rip it out, then rip it out, but it should be flat. All right. And then we're going to sew along the bottom and make sure that it's folded. So it should not be flat out like that. It should be folded. And we're going to sew right along the bottom there as well. You can pin it, or if you want, you can just grab a piece of paper tape and tape it down. Right? And that's what's going to get you to seal that seam allowance that I didn't do before. At 1/8 of an inch, you're going to do that. And that's how you get your dimensional pocket. All right, so let's go back to the sewing machine and do that. Once again, make sure that you, if you can't do, now this is going to be kind of tricky. If you can't do 1/8 of an inch, for those of you who are new, and you try to do 1/4 of an inch, because you have that seam in there, that seam may come out. So it has to be 1/8 of an inch or somewhere between, just be consistent. So I'm going to back tack at the beginning. And it is thick, so take your time. And remember, I used a longer stitch length purposely for this. I'm not pulling, I'm just holding it. If you have to hand crank it, then hand crank it, but it should go through. Just take your time. Okay. Once again, just take your time doing that. Okay. I'm pulling towards the stitches, not away from the stitches. And hopefully, I'm sorry I didn't take you to the sewing machine with me. I'm sorry about that, Arnetta. And I'm just going to pull that with it. And if you did that, then there should be no opening down here along the bottom, and it is complete. All right, so now when you fold your bag in half, that's your pocket. Okay. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to create the flap. So I'm going to set this to the side, and you're going to get your flap pieces. So you're going to need both the exterior and the lining pieces for this, because we're doing a complete strap, a complete flap. And then what we need to do as well is we're going to stitch the pieces together. But first, get my foam. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to base stitch the foam around the flap. So we want to attach our foam to our flap. Once again, your foam should be shorter. I'm not worrying about the fold over here, because the way that the flap gets attached is I stitch it and then I stitch it again. So I'm not worrying about the fold over in this case, but I'm just going to stitch this to my exterior. It doesn't really matter. You could stitch it to the lining. So it's the foam is getting added to the back of my exterior piece. And I'm just going to clip it all the way around so it doesn't move on me. So you match up the curves on the bottom. And using 1/8 of a seam allowance, I'm just going to attach it. I just don't want it flapping around in there as I try to sew the lining. So that's why I'm doing this. I base stitch a lot. For anybody who watches me do this, you'll see me base stitch a lot. So we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to base stitch all the way around. So start at one edge, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, longest stitch length or whatever stitch length you're comfortable ripping out. Okay, so we've sewn that on. We've base stitched that to the back side of our material. All right, and that's done. And then next what we're going to do is we're going to turn this right side up. We're going to grab our lining piece, which is this piece. We're going to lay them right sides together. We're going to match up the corners. Once again, clip them in place. Just like that. And I just want to make sure I get the top here aligned. It's more important that I get the top than I get the bottom. Okay, so we're going to do that. And then we're going to attach it. Once we've attached this to the bottom, we can then turn it right side out and we can press it. So we're going to stitch all the way around, attaching the lining piece to the exterior with the foam on it. That's going to be 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and it's going to be a stitch length of between 3 and 3.5. Back tack at the top and the bottom. Okay, and we're done. So what I will say to you is when you're stitching on your sewing machine, as I was sewing around here, I let the machine pull it, but I kind of look at it and think of it as a straight line. And I go a little bit slow around the curves. Some people will take a smaller stitch around the curve, which makes it easier. I just use the same stitch length, take my time, and as it's going around, I just act as if this is a straight line, and I just follow the straight line on the curve. It's something that when you hear it and think to yourself, okay, I'm gonna try it the next time, but it is a straight line because you're just going around the curve. The next thing we want to do is turn this right side out, but to make it easier, you can notch these curved corners so that it looks neater, or you can grade them by cutting close to that line. So notching means that I just cut little slits Don't cut into your stitches. So you just do this, right? Or what you can do is grade it like we did the other one and cut around as close as you can to those stitches. So those are two options if you want to eliminate some of that bulk and get a cleaner corner. So we're going to stick our hand in here. I'm going to push down on one of those corners and I'm going to turn this right side out. So this is why I had you attach the foam initially, so that you make sure it doesn't come dislodged and all three pieces are attached. If you try to do it, sometimes you don't get the foam attached and then you have to come back in. So I'm pushing this out. Once again, crochet hook, knitting needle, purple thing, whatever you like to use to get this out. Just make sure you make a nice rounded corner because that's what you sewed. If you need to notch it, you can notch it. You can grade it so many different ways. Check all of your seams to make sure you didn't leave anything behind, right? There's nothing worse than you do something and realize you didn't catch your lining, you didn't catch your exterior. All right. You're then going to roll this and flatten it. I don't know if you can see that the lining is popping to the front. I want to make sure I push that lining to the back and my exterior is to the front. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just rolling that to the back. Just like that. All the way around. Once you've done that, you're then going to iron it because I want it to be as flat as possible because I will be top stitching around this entire flap. So I will top stitch around this edge. Just like that. By the way, yes, I purposely got that V on my flap. But you can do it at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance if you'd like, or you can do it at 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to do mine at 1/8 of an inch. But for anybody that's new, it may be easier for you to just use your edge of your presser foot to go around these curves. So I'm just going to poke this one out a little bit more, and then I will iron it. Okay. I remembered the next time to show you guys the sewing machine. All right. Once again, make sure that that lining has been rolled to the back. So you don't want the lining in the front, you want it to the back. And then I'm going to iron it. Okay. We're going to go back to the sewing machine. And once again, I'm going to sew or top stitch around the entire piece. So I will be top stitching from here. I'm not worrying about closing the top right now. You're going to top stitch, go all the way around. Then when you come back, then you can go across the top and seal in the top. But just, start here and come down and come all the way around. So I'm just making sure that my corners look nice. 1/8 of an inch. If you think you're going to have a problem because your needle's going to fall off, then use 1/4 of an inch. It's totally fine. Stitch length is between a 4 and a 4.5. Once again, for me, my 1/8 of an inch is going to be on my sewing machine is right in here on the presser foot. So that's what I follow on my sewing machine. You can follow, measure it. And when you're measuring it, it's the distance from the tip of the needle to the edge of the fabric. That's really what an 1/8 of an inch is, or the tip of the needle to the edge of the fabric if your fabric was out here, right? So that's how you'd measure it. You just lay a ruler down and measure it that way. I am going to back tack. And remember I said, as you're going around that corner, just say to yourself, this is a straight line. And you're just trying to keep that straight line. You're also going to look a little bit before it. You're not looking at that needle go up and down. So when it stops looking like a straight line and a curve, you can turn your material just ever so slightly. And then when I get to the top, about 1/8 of an inch with the needle down, roll your hand wheel so the needle goes up. And then I'm just going to close this up at the top so I don't have to worry about it later. All right. So then I've done that. Now I will say to you, there are edge feet that you can get to help you keep that 1/8 of an inch or that 1/4 of an inch going around. There are feet that do that. When I'm showing you how to make a bag, I try not to use any special tools because I think the tools come later when you realize, okay, I may need this tool, so I'll invest in it, but you don't need the tools in the beginning. And so that's why I don't, really show too many tools. And I give you very simple tools, even with the kits, to use to do your work. Okay. So now we're going to add our twist, our lock, our push together locks, these. All right, so there's 2 pieces. So there's one piece, if you look at it, it's going to be hard to show you, but one piece is smaller than the other. I'll do the best I can. But this piece here is smaller, so it'll snap right in. Hopefully you can see that. And so the smaller piece I'm going to put underneath, and the bigger piece I'm going to put on top. Right? So I'm going to put the smaller piece underneath. But first, what I need to do is cut that hole out for my piece. So I have you measure up and center your plate. So to make it easier, I turn the plate wrong side up. So if you turn it wrong side up, it'll lay flatter. If you turn it the other way, it won't. Also, if you look at this, there are like on this plate, there are little circles here, and they actually, see if I can show you. Okay. Right here, there's a little circle on the top and the bottom, and they're right in the center. That's really the center of your lock. And then it looks almost like it had like a little line or an arrow, but that's your center. Those are your center marks. So those should align center with your flap once it's done. So you're going to center your flap. You can fold this in half. You can't cut the bottom, but you can definitely cut the top. So you can notch the top right here. Once again, stay outside. Don't cut past that seam that you just stitched, that 1/8 of an inch. Okay. Then you can line that up just like that. Take a look, and that should be the center of your flap. And I'm lining that notch right here with the center line, and then I'm looking on either side just to make sure it's even, and then that'll be my center. All right. Once you've done that, you're going to grab your ruler, and you're going to measure up from the bottom. So I'm grabbing my ruler, and I'm going to measure up from the bottom. So I give you the center. So this was my center line right here for me. And where the edges is where I'm measuring up. Okay. And then what you will do, bottom of the flap, just double checking my measurements here. Yep. Okay. And I'm going to place my my lock. Now, I gave you a guideline. You can go up or down, right? If you want it a little higher, a little lower. What I will say to you though is grab your bag because this is really what we're doing, just so that you can see exactly what we're doing. This is your bag. So I really want it to be placed, right? This is a flap. I really want it to be placed right there where that is. So when I have you measure up, what I do is I have you place it right here so that underneath here is really where the twist lock is. And once again, remember I said I want you to see some of this pocket. If you put it too high up, it's going to come even further down and you're going to hide your pocket. So it's whatever your look is. I'm doing it so that you can get your twist lock right there and it's not too far up, but you can see part of your pocket. So that's really what I'm doing here. And it'll look kind of strange, but it does work. And I'll show you on this one as well. See how low it is from the bottom? All right. So I have you measure up from there. All right. So that's what we're doing. So hopefully all of those visuals make a lot of sense to you and you understand what we're trying to do. Okay. So back to the flap, center it top to bottom, find your center line. Just want to make sure. I'm going to measure up. I am going to take, this is my center line. I am going to take a marker and a tool, a writing tool, and I am going to draw a line. Not going to worry about it. A chalk line is fine. I'm not going to worry too much about it when it comes to seeing it later on, because I am going to put this plate right here and the edge of the plate will be right there, so you won't really see it. So I'm going to do this. Now, because I took that peak in my fabric, that piece right here, that's actually my center line. So I cut mine purposely, but you want to make sure that you're aligning this and this, and then you're going to draw a little line coming down so you know where your center line is. And then you're going to take your piece, and it's the one with the bigger hole. Once again, I'll try to show you that. All right, this one has a bigger hole than this one. This one will be on top. You're going to align that center circle right there, just like that. And we're going to come back and cut it, but you're going to use the inside of this and draw that rectangle. So we're going to draw that rectangle right around the inside. And that'll tell us where we're going to cut. Now, I will say to you, there are tools that you can use, and I will show you what they look like. And you can get them from Amazon. It's a whole kit. All right, so I drew my line there. I'll show you the little kit that I have. And it looks like this. And they come with different cutouts. They're like little dies, and they come with different sizes. So you can take one that's close to your size. So let's say you look at that one, you go, okay, that's too big. You can grab a different one. You could say, okay, that one's, too tall. And you would size them up and you would find the one that's closest to what you need. There's a sharp end and there's a flat end. So I don't know if you can see it. I've used this one. There's a sharp end, which is shiny. See that shiny? And then that one's not shiny. So I use a rubber mallet. I would tell you don't do this against your cutting mat, but rather get maybe an old, I have a plastic cutting board that you use to cut fruits and vegetables. You can get that also from Amazon or the dollar store. And then what you would do is put the sharp side down and use your rubber mallet to hit it to create the hole. Okay. These you can get on Amazon. I'm going to cut my hole out manually, so I'm not going to use any tools because once again, I always say, if you know how to do it without the tools just help. And you may decide you never have to cut a hole, so you don't want to spend money on something you're never going to use. But if you find that over time you are using it, by all means, purchase one. So I'm going to get a sharp pair of scissors because you will need that to cut this hole. And I will cut my hole out. So I cut the middle first. So I go into the middle. So you can fold this in half and snip it, or just stick your pointy scissors in there. And I just stick my pointy scissors right in there and I just squeeze them. So I cut right in the middle. So this is sort of like cutting when you're installing a zipper. And then I cut around that opening. It's just a rectangle. And I cut right around that opening. and cut through all the layers. You're going to need to cut through all the layers with this, by the way. So you're going to need to cut through the foam. You need to cut through the exterior and the lining. If you have to do it in pieces, that's fine as well. But you're going to cut this out. You'll see it doesn't really take too long. Try not to cut bigger than the square that you drew. We're going to come back later on, but just try not to cut bigger than the square. All right, so that cut didn't take too long, right? I cut my hole right in there. All right. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit because I didn't get this corner so sharp. So I'm just going to cut that fabric just a little bit. All right. Then what you're going to do is I take the one that's going on the back because it's smaller than the one that's going on the front. I flip this over. I take the one that's going on the back and I push the pieces through that hole. So I do like this. All right. Now, if you look at it and say, oh, well, I can cut it a little bit bigger, like I'm looking at it now. So it's better you cut it too small than too big. I'm going to go back and take maybe 1/8 of an inch on each side. So I'll cut it just a tad bigger. You want to be careful because what I will say to you is you only have that much room, a little bit of room right here, the space between here and the edge. If you cut it too big, you're going to see your hole. So you only have a little bit of space. So I'm just going to cut about 1/8 of an inch on each side. And it's just a little, like a little haircut, a trim, as it were. And just because I want it even, I will cut it on the other side also. So once again, just chip away. I take the one with the smaller hole, I stick it to the back, just like that. And you can push it down. I use an awl, and you're going to push it down. So push the fabric out of the way because you want to expose the edges so that you can install the plate. So I'm just going to do this really quickly. I'm going to cut, and just so it's even, which is why I'm cutting both sides, because if you just cut one side, your lock is going to be lopsided. All right, so I cut both sides just to make sure it's not lopsided. Okay. Once again, I'm going from the back to the front. All right, good. Use it all. I'm just going to go right around this to expose that piece of metal, just like that. And it's good. Okay. There we go. So that's in there. Just want to make sure it's straight. The other thing is, now, in order to protect my piece right here, I'm going to stick a piece of foam under it because I want to protect my hardware. I am using a rubber mallet, but even with the rubber mallet, you want to protect your piece. So I'm going to stick a piece of foam right under there just to make sure. So I put it on my cutting mat as well, just like that. Hopefully you guys can see it. I will, let me just zoom in a little bit just so that you guys can see what I'm doing. And all right, so hopefully you can see what I'm doing right there. All right, don't worry about that pen mark. That's going to come off when I put the iron to it. All right. Just cut away some of these threads. So this will take a little bit of time, but okay. I'm then going to take the bigger piece, which is this piece, and I'm going to put it on top, just like that. Let's cut a piece of this foam off again. The reason I'm doing this is because I don't want to scratch up. To rubber mallet, it shouldn't scratch it up with a rubber mallet. A hammer may, but not a rubber mallet. But I just want to double check, and I'm going to put this here, hold it in place, take my foam, put it right over it, hold it in place. And you should be able to give it like 1 or 2 whacks, maybe 3 at the most. And you're going to tap it and you'll feel it. Got a little dislodged. Let's try it again. And you're just going to whack it. I like these better than the screw ones as well, because I find the screw ones sometimes they if you cut the opening for the screw once again and it's too big, you have a problem. Don't hit your hand, by the way. There we go. Okay, so I give it a couple of whacks. I'm just straightening it out. Make sure it's totally straight. And then I'm just going to whack it again. Okay, and that's in there. I don't use any glue. They're considered force fit. I don't use any glue. The foam actually helps because it has a thickness to it. If you just did it between 2 pieces of fabric, like there was just a fabric piece and no foam, then what you would notice is it would be maybe a little bit too thin and you'd have a gap. But the foam does a really nice job of filling in those gaps. So just want to make sure. And you can look in it and you can actually look in here, and you can see whether or not it's totally fitted. So that's how you install the force fit. So let's take you out a little bit. Okay. Perfect. All right, so now you can grab your, excuse me, you can grab your piece, double check. So when you put it on, twist it, it should fit perfectly. All right. You should also have, like I said, a little bit of this exposed. So that's done. All right. The next thing we're going to do once we've done that is let's go in and I think we're doing just want to make sure. So we're going to attach the sides, but before we attach the side, we want to attach the flap. Yes, we're going to attach the flap. So we're going to take this off. So this is the front. We want to attach the flap to the back. So the way that the flap gets attached to the back is we're going to take the flap, make sure it's the exterior part of it and the part of it that was sewn, right? So it's this part here that was open that we base stitched close. And what we're going to do is we're going to attach it in such a way that it's going to be sort of like 2 steps. So we're going to measure down from that raw edge. It's going to be centered. We're going to stitch it down. Then we're going to flip it up this way and we're going to stitch it again. So that's how we're going to do it. So that's a head start. So what I'm going to do is fold this piece in half to find the center because it'll make it easier. You can draw the center if you want, but I'm going to just fold it in half this way. And I'm going to snip to find the center. And then once I've done that, I'm going to do the same. So that's the center, right? Because I want to make sure when I'm laying this down, this center matches with the center of my flap here. So if you didn't cut a center, and I did, there's a little notch right there. You want to make sure that this center matches the other center. So just weigh this down a little bit. Measure on either side over here to make sure it's equidistant from the edges, your edges. Make sure that it's centered. Make sure this is straight and centered. Yep. Equidistant from either side and centered. And then the next thing we're going to do is on your pattern on page 24, it tells you how far down from the back raw edge you should be going. So it tells you how far down from here you should measure to place this. But once again, it should be centered. All right, so make sure that you measure down centered. If you have to lay your ruler on there, then just lay your ruler on there to make sure that it's centered. Once again, measure from your edges. So you're going to measure from this side. Make sure it's the same distance as it is on this side. All right, so just double check that everything is centered. This is where you can, once again, if you want to put paper tape here, I'm just going to stick a couple of pins in here just to make it easier. I don't want it to be, if I was doing it, I'd do paper tape. But, you know, I'm doing this for you guys, so I don't want to like be fiddling with it while I'm showing how to do it. So this is right sides together, right? Because this is the right side and this is the right side. So it's right sides together, centered, double check it's centered. So this is the center. Measure the sides, make sure they're totally the same. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stitch across here using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. All right. So we're going to go across here 1/4 of an inch. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. Hopefully you're with me. Yep. Okay. So make sure I switch the cameras. Okay. Once again, for me, my 1/4 of an inch is the edge of my presser foot here. I will back tack, so I'm going to start a little bit on the fabric first. Stitch length of 3.5 or a 3. Forward, back tack. Okay. Let's try this again. Okay. Once you've done that at 1/4 of an inch, I'll show you what I'm going to do next. I have to come to the cutting mat to do that, to do this. This is 1/4 of an inch, but because I'm going to fold this up and sew again at 1/4 of an inch, I do not want to see this, right? So when I fold this up this way, you really, really have to push it and make sure that you get above that 1/4 of an inch stitch line. If you think you're going to have any concern about that, what you will do is you'll come in and you'll cut in half the 1/4 of an inch. You'll go straight across this way and cut that in half. Don't cut too close to the stitch line, because if you cut close to the stitch line, it'll come dislodged. If you do it this way, it should be good. You shouldn't have any issues. You shouldn't have to cut, but if you're concerned, you can. We're going to flip this up and we're going to aggressively push our flap up this way, just like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come back and we're going to stitch along this folded edge at 1/4 of an inch. So let's do that again. Once again, you're going to use a seam allowance of 1/4 of an inch, and my stitch length that I'm using is a 3.5. If you want to, you can make it a 4. It's up to you. It depends on how you feel about the thickness, and you know your machine, right? You'll know your machine. So I'm going to back tack beginning and the end. Okay. That's it. It's just one row of stitching. That seals in that raw edge. That was the purpose of it. And it also, I didn't add this to the actual, I I did not add this to the top of the bag because then once again, it would create bulk. So now if I fold it back, hopefully you can see that there are no raw edges there, right? Because I sealed it right in there. So that's why I said just push it aggressively. So in other words, just really push it and then do it. So now what happens is if I take my exterior and I fold this flap over like that, this is going to be how it's going to look when I'm done, right? So the bottoms here, these little black pieces actually line up. I pushed it, I lined that, and that's how it's going to look, and that's how you end up getting it center. So now we're ready to do the sides, right? So we're going to set this to the side. You're going to grab your side pieces, and these should be the exterior pieces. You're going to grab your foam. Okay. And you're going to stitch each piece of foam underneath that flap, the same way that we did it for the front and the back. The easiest way to do this, of course, is to just clip the bottoms like this, and then the side. And we're going to base stitch all the way around, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we can do them at the same time. Align the bottom. As a tip, I normally put whatever the smoothest piece of material is. So the foam may grab the bed. I don't know, everybody's machine is different, but I normally stitch it foam side down. But if you have like vinyl, for example, and you're sewing, and then under here you have either a waterproof canvas, cotton, whatever for your lining, sew with the vinyl side up, because if you sew it this way, the vinyl will grab your bed, your sewing machine bed, and it gets stuck. It can get stuck. So if you sew it with vinyl side up, the other material is smoother and it should glide on your sewing machine bed. All right. So I'm going to stitch around this. You don't have to sew the top, just stitch around the sides. Make sure that your top here is unfolded on both of your pieces. And we're going to do that 1/8 of an inch, longest stitch length on your sewing machine. We're just going to baste it in. Okay, and I'm just going to add this one to the bottom. I'm not even going to cut the thread. Okay. Okay, I'm done. I didn't take you again with me, but I just sewed all the way around the edges. All right. So now that we've done that, I'm going to mark the center of each of these because I remember I said I want to align them when I mark the center of my bottom or on my waterproof canvas. So I'm just going to fold this in half, snip it. You can definitely use a marking tool to mark the center. So whichever makes it easier for you. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to do the same at the top. I'm just going to snip the top. And that's because when I align the lining to the exterior piece, my center marks are already there. So I tend to mark tops and bottoms a lot by doing this. Okay. So there we go. So now you're going to grab your exterior piece. For right now, you only need one of your side pieces, one of these. I'm going to fold this in half. And starting at the center mark on the bottom, I'm going to clip this. Now, it should be wrong sides together, right? So the center mark on the exterior piece with the center mark on the side piece, and it should be wrong sides together. I'm not going to clip anything else for right now. I'm just going to rotate this, and I'm going to align my top. So my top edge is right here on one side. All right, so now I have that. This is all right. So then what I'm going to do is come back down here. I've clipped the top here, and I'm going to clip on either side of my centerpiece, or my center mark, I should say, just like that. And then you can start clipping around the curve and up the side. So I try to do around the center on the side. And then as I get around the curve here, I do the same thing. So I just keep inching around the curve. Make sure that you're aligning that curve. That's going to be the part that you're going to need to sew. So it can be kind of tricky if you leave it behind. So put as many clips as you need around that curve, just like that. So you'll see I put a lot of clips. This is also why I had you baste the foam, because it's so many layers, and if they're not basted, you can leave piece of your material behind, either your exterior fabric or your foam. But you can see I've done that, right? So I've done one half, just like that. Now I can take the other half, align the tops the same way, right sides together. I always align the top first, just because it makes it easier to ease it in. And then what I will do is I will roughly find the middle of the side and do that here. Clip it in place, and then I start working my way around. Now I will be sewing from the inside, not the outside. So that's why the round parts of my clips, I don't know if you can see it here, are facing up, because I'm going to be sewing around like this. Now a trick you can use is, if you want, you can staple this, use actual staples. Just make sure that they're out of the way of your stitch line, so about 1/8 of an inch, and you can staple it and then come back and remove the staples. It's a little bit more advanced, but you have to be very careful because you don't want to break needles. So that's what it looks like on one side. See that? So I'm going to go in now. I'm going to tuck my flap in there. Your flap should be completely out of the way, so it shouldn't even be in your seam line. And then you're going to just sew all the way around. So we're going to go to the sewing machine. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a stitch length of 3. Actually, a 3.5. So hopefully nobody's getting dizzy yet from the camera switching. I will back tack. Once again, make sure that those tops, those top edges align. 1/4 inch. I need to change my stitch length because I was basting before. And take your time. Take your time with this. Now, I don't take the clip out until I get to it, and that's because if you take it out too soon, sometimes you can knock the alignment of your pieces off, and then one piece will go one way, one will go the other way, and then you'll realize you didn't get your corner. So I'm going to grab my awl here. I don't know if you guys can't see it, but right here, you take the clip off, it can knock it out of alignment. So I'm just going to make sure that I get everything. Don't do this at home with your scissors. Okay. And I did not lift my presser foot. I just kept my presser foot down because I needed to hold it in place. Okay. And just tuck your fabric under. So as you're doing this, just turn, you just tuck it underneath to get it out of the way. So I'm pushing it with my thumb. And I apologize in advance, but the camera is sitting right here. So try to make sure I don't do that. Okay. That's one side down. Let's just double check it to make sure that we caught all the layers. Like I said, there's nothing worse than you finish and then you realize you left a layer behind. Okay, so here we go. Everything should be caught. This one's like barely caught over here in the corner, but I caught it. I can't stick my finger through it. That's why I said I shifted it. But everything here is caught. If you want to, I could always go back here, take that out, and then catch it, but it'll be good. It's not that bad. So the same thing you did with one side, you're now going to do with the other side. So I'm going to grab my other piece here. Wrong side, right sides together. I start at the bottom. This one should go quicker. Center it. I then put a clip in the center. I'll put one on either side, just like this. And then I'll clip the top, and then I'll work around the curve. So I'll clip the top here. Then I'll go to the center, or roughly the center. And then I'll just continue clipping. So it should fit in there pretty good, pretty well. Sometimes what I even do is I'll run like double-sided tape. I'll run double-sided tape because this is straight. Run it right on that straight edge. I use a thin one, so 1/8 of an inch because my seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. And then I will peel it back, and then I will stick the two pieces together and add clips. And that helps, especially when you're going around that curve, because if it helps the fabric from shifting. But I would recommend that you use a thinner, less narrow, 1/8 of an inch, so that you don't have any tape when you're done to worry about. So that's another tip. So those should fit perfectly right around that curve. So use as many clips as you need to get it aligned. So now what we'll do is we'll do the same thing that we did before, where we'll start up here, we'll go all the way down and around and back up the top. So let's go to the sewing machine. Once again, apologize in advance for the camera, but it's sitting right here. I'm going to tuck my flap in. So that's what I'm doing off camera. I'm just tucking my flap. Your side should not be anywhere near your flap. Your flap should be centered and away from the sides. So now what we're going to do, I'm just going to make sure that that top is aligned. That's very important when we're doing the final bag, because we want to make sure all our seams on the sides match, but the top has to match. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Yes, you can use a stylus. I use an awl, but you can use a stylus. Fold that fabric right out of the way. And these awls also, you can get them on Amazon. So the way that the awl helps is when you poke your fabric here, it helps to hold the fabric together. Just be careful going underneath. So like when I came to this corner and it like folded in a little bit, I can actually pull this fabric out and push that piece in so that they're back in alignment, and then I can hold it in place. So that's the way that the awl helps. So if you're wondering why am I using this awl, but once again, there are stylists which are a lot pointier, but I just use an awl. Take your time doing this. This is probably the trickiest part of this whole project, this and the handle. Remember to always leave your needle down when you're manipulating your fabric. Okay. So our sides are done. So once again, we're going to check our seams and make sure everything is aligned nicely. So I did my seams. This seam actually came out a lot better than the other seam when I said it got very close over here. This one, I didn't have that issue. I can then feel around, turn your bag right side out. So just turn it right side out completely, just like this. Okay, poke out your corner of your bag. So I'm poking out this corner. Once again, check your seams. Make sure that everything is, nice in there and it's even, and you don't have any holes or gaps. If you do, just turn it wrong side out again and go back and do it again. Take a look at your bag. I just have a little thread here. All right. Flip everything up. All right. Check your closure. Make sure it looks even on both sides. Both sides. So check that. Make sure it looks even. Just going to zoom out a little bit so we can take a look at exactly what I'm doing. to get a better view of it. Okay, so that's what it looks like. I checked the closure, opened it. You can see your back of your bag, the bottom. All right, and that's your exterior piece. Done. Once again, you'll see why I sewed that edge down, because it will make it easier when we have to match up the edges. Your flap will be out of the way. So once we top stitch, the flap is out of the way because of how it's sewn in there, but everything should align perfectly, just like that. So tomorrow, and I'll leave this for day 3. Tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll work on our zipper. So cut out, interface what you need for the zipper. You will need the zipper closure pieces, which are these pieces here. Tomorrow, by the way, tomorrow I mean day 3. You will need these 2 pieces, and you will need your lining piece. So you'll need the lining piece as well. And then you won't need any foam, but you will need a piece of Decoville Heavy. And remember, I said this gets fused to the actual lining piece of your fabric. So it will get attached to the bottom. And then you're also going to need a piece for the top. So this is what you will need. I'll show you on the actual bag. When you sew the lining together with the zipper in place, there will be a top piece right here. And that's the piece that you're going to need as well for your bag. I made mine the same material as my exterior fabric, just because it gave it a cohesive look. But this piece right here, you will need that piece as well. You can make it the same material as your lining, but because I use the exterior fabric for this recessed zipper, I use that exterior fabric as well. So we will be attaching this top piece with the zipper sandwiched in between that and the lining. And then you will also need apologies for the sound. You will also need the pieces for this pocket, and it will be one piece. So it's one continuous piece of material that you will use for that pocket. And then we will just fold it in half to construct this pocket. So once again, you're going to need this piece. You will need the piece that's here for the zipper. You will need the zipper tab. You will need this piece here, which is a whole piece for the lining. Now the lining has no seam. There's no seam on the bottom at all. It's just one continuous piece of fabric that wraps around. We will be putting a piece of Decoville Heavy just to add stability, because we did not really support the exterior bottom of the bag. And then you should have your side pieces interfaced as well. So those are the things that we're going to need for day 3. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. I really enjoyed, by the way, the engagement. I like that everybody asked really good questions. This always helps other bag makers learn things. So it's not just from me, but somebody will ask a question and then I'll answer the question. And so sometimes it prompts me, but sometimes you guys could say, hey, you could also do this. So help other bag makers and try to build this community up in such a way that we're all learning new skills and techniques from each other. I just happen to be the facilitator for this, for the sew along, but you guys are always teaching me every single day. So if you've liked and you've enjoyed sitting along with me as I've sewn day 1, we've done the prep work, and today we have done the exterior construction. If you've enjoyed the last 2 days, click on the subscribe button. It costs you nothing. You're not actually signing up for anything. It's just so that you can get notified whenever I have another video. And also, if you like it, give it a thumbs up so other people know that they can come here and learn. Um, I appreciate each one of you, and I'm hoping that you're all go out there making bags and that you're being bold about making your bags and you're being bold about your decisions. So thanks again so much. Bye-bye. Bye, Della. Okay, I'll see you on the next video. Good night.